Alrighty, so last week we passed a very important milestone for this channel, 50,000 subscribers. That is more than the population of any of Canada's 3 northern territories and more than the population of 7 UN member states. Anyway, last week, in honor of passing the 50,000 subscriber mark, I promised I would do another Q&A video with you guys, and in response, you guys sent an enormous load of questions. Most of them were really good, and I wish I could have had time to answer all of them. Okay, so Ryan Leek asks, how well do you think Justin Trudeau has done in office so far? Well, from my political perspective, I do not think he has done a very good job. I think a lot of the decisions that his government has made regarding the Canadian economy and the management of the federal budget and foreign policy and immigration and democracy have been very reckless and destructive. Now, that being said, I think the thing that conservative people like me have to concede about Justin Trudeau is that he has been quite consequential in office. So you could say that on one level he has actually been a very effective prime minister, just not in doing the things that I may like. This is the old Marco Rubio, he knows exactly what he's doing kind of line.
Let's dispel with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing.
Cameron Ryan asks, what do you think about Conservative leader Andrew Scheer? Do you think he has what it takes to beat Justin Trudeau in 2019? I like Andrew Scheer just fine. I was happy to see him become leader of the Canadian Conservative Party last year. But that being said, I think it is quite clear that he is a very gentle and non-confrontational man by disposition, and thus not someone who is really inclined to offer himself up as a very aggressive or sharp contrast with Justin Trudeau. I continue to think that the best scenario for the Canadian Conservatives is just that Justin Trudeau continues to get so unpopular that Andrew Scheer is sort of elected by default. But I really do not see a scenario in which some big mass of Canadians start to all vote en masse for Andrew Scheer because they find his vision of government so fresh and captivating. The cheerfully named I Wanna Die asks, do you believe Quebec will one day become a country, and if so, why? Right now I would say no, only because I cannot really imagine how the logistics would work out. I think it has become quite clear that what Quebec wants is maximum independence and sovereignty from Canada, while also retaining all of the many benefits it gets at present from being in Canada. So it actually becomes a lot like Brexit. Is it possible to come up with a separation deal in which you maintain all of your benefits and make no sacrifices? I think the answer is no, and I think the Quebecers know that it's no. Fishbait asks, what's something in the US you wish they had in Canada? That is hard to say because I do think that these days you can get most US things in Canada if you're willing to try hard enough and pay enough. One thing though that I do wish we had more of here was free shipping when you order stuff online. That is still way more common in the US than it is here. Marshall Harrison asks, what are the differences between the Canadian Conservative Party and the American Republican Party? Well, I guess the biggest one is that the Canadian Conservative Party is run a lot differently. It is much more rigidly hierarchical with a single party boss at the top who controls everything below. So there is a lot less diversity of opinion and freedom of political action allowed within the Conservative Party than within the US Republican Party. In terms of what the parties actually believe, which is what I assume you're more interested in, I would say one of the biggest differences is that the Canadian Conservative Party is very pro-abortion, while the American Republican Party is very against it. The Canadian Conservative Party actually has a pretty radical pro-choice position on abortion, in which they believe that absolutely no laws should ever be passed regulating abortion in any way. But all of the pro-life Canadians still support them anyway. Poesque asks, who is your favorite Canadian Prime Minister? I would say Stephen Harper, actually. I just think that he was the Prime Minister whose understanding of Canada was the most honest, and thus had the most appropriate disposition towards what the government of Canada should or shouldn't do. I don't agree with everything that his government did, but I did always trust his motivations for why he was doing it. Connor asks, what do you feel is the biggest difference between Canada and the US? Well, the biggest difference is that Canadians are obsessed with not being Americans. So the Canadian mind spends a lot of time playing this whole game of compare and contrast with the US and comparing American things to Canadian things, with any virtue of a Canadian thing always being measured through a judgment in contrast to the American thing. Americans very obviously do not have a comparable obsession with Canada, or indeed any other country. James asks, why do you think that the monarchy has no place in Canada? I just think that it is a foreign institution with no relevance to Canadian culture or values. As a constitutional matter, I do not think it adds anything of value to Canadian democracy, and in fact, quite clearly does not even deliver the things that it promises. Bo Sendai asks, can you write a condescending limerick about Quebec? Well, okay. To get the Quebecers to stay, we must do everything that they say. Regardless of price, we must all sacrifice, and do it while speaking Francais. Philip Lanier asks, do you think Canada will ever be annexed by the United States? I don't think the United States is going to invade and conquer Canada, but I do think it is very possible at some point in the future that the two countries merge in some form. As much as Canadians claim to hate America, the long-term view of history has seen the countries get closer and closer and closer, economically and politically. And I mean, that's in addition to the fact that we've always been basically the same culturally. When or where or under what sort of conditions this kind of merger might happen, I don't know. Jake Mitchell asks, who's your favorite president? It is a cliche, but I would have to say George Washington. Without him, there would be no America. But I also think it's important to appreciate the degree to which a lot of the precedents and actions and traditions that he took as America's first president helped consolidate the form of democratic government that America still has to this day. Roger asks, how do you feel about the Trump presidency? So this is obviously something I get asked a lot. Trump is obviously this very domineering, smothering, everywhere, all the time political figure of this age. And as a result, I try to be a little bit thoughtful about how I think of him, only to avoid, being too predictably one way or the other, which I don't think is what good political commentary is made of. I quite like the idea of a sort of outsider figure being president of the United States, and as a conservative, I also have to acknowledge that he has done a lot of very sort of conventionally Republican things that I would probably support if any other Republican president did it. I also do have some sort of knee-jerk tribal sympathy for him. Like, I think that some of the rhetoric that the left uses against him is just ridiculously over the top, and I do think that the Mueller investigation is, in fact, kind of a bit of a witch hunt. But then, on the other hand, I think it has to be conceded that he is very vain and very ignorant in a lot of ways. I think he could really wind up doing a lot of damage to the conservative movement in the long term just because he is so personally unpopular. But really, I mostly just think about him in a sort of detached, curious, observational kind of way. Like, oh, this is a kind of interesting thing. I wonder how this is going to play out. I guess part of that is just my privilege as a foreigner. Imperial History asks, what is your opinion about separatism? Do you think places like Catalonia, Tibet, Palestine, and others should be independent? I don't really have very strong feelings on those places specifically, but I do generally tend to have a pretty skeptical view of nationalist separatist movements more broadly. I think a lot of the time they are primarily angry adversarial movements motivated more by a hatred of someone else than anything else. I think a lot of today's separatist movements are much less about escaping any actual real oppression than just inventing and exaggerating differences, which might actually be quite small. I think part of this comes from the fact that I am a Canadian who is very critical of anti-Americanism, so I tend to be very suspicious of any sort of nationalistic movement that is primarily about just not being someone else. All right, some lighter stuff now. Emile D'Alessi asks, what type of music do you love? I am not a very sophisticated music fan. I basically like whatever music my Spotify Discover Weekly playlist tells me to listen to, which I guess is mostly just top 40 and like hipster indie stuff. Anna asks, do you watch anime? I do not. Anime was a mistake. Maddie asks, do you ever get any criticism from the LGBT community for your more conservative views? This is another very common question I get asked a lot. I would say no. I get a lot of criticism from progressive people of all sorts, but I would not say that I get noticeably more criticism from progressive members of the LGBT scene. When you're not gay or don't know a lot of gay people, I think it is very easy to assume that the gay community is a lot tighter and more homogenous than it actually is. But most gay people have actually encountered a huge diversity of gay people in their own lives. So in my experience, it doesn't really shock or offend them to learn that gay conservatives are a thing that exists. Logan asks, if you could live in America, what state would you live in? Probably California. It is the most exciting state, and it has the best weather. Angulamations asks, if you could live anywhere in the world outside of Canada or the US, where would you live? I would say Holland. It is the country I have spent the most time in outside of North America, and I always really enjoy my time there. Harrison asks, have you ever encountered a fan in public? What is your favorite story of one of these encounters? Yes, it happens sometimes, and it's always a lot of fun for me. So if you ever see me on the street, please say hi. I would say it is most fun when it happens when I'm out with one of my friends, because then it really makes me seem like I'm very famous in their eyes. Rodolfo Lopez asks, are you aware of how much you move your head in your videos, and where did you pick up the habit? Unfortunately, I am just a very fidgety person, and I have a very hard time staying still, which leads to the next question. Do you sit on a gym ball when you record videos? Yes, indeed I do. Yeah, see, right here. For many, many years now, I've always sat on gym balls instead of chairs just because they are fun when you're as squirmy as I am. Favorite video game? Probably Super Mario World. Favorite Simpsons episode? That's easy, behind the laughter. Will you ever grow back your stash? God, no. Don't you think this is a big improvement? Superior Sphimix asks, what's the deal with the Wart Mamu in the channel URL? Okay, so what he is referring to is the fact that there are technically two URLs for this channel. One is youtube.com/JJMcCullough, but another is youtube.com/WartMamu. This is because when I first registered for YouTube back in 2006, long before I started making videos, WartMamu was a username I used a lot, and that username dated back to when I was a teenager. Okay, so this gets very nerdy now. So in Mario, there is this fairly obscure character. In English, his name is Wart, but in Japanese, his name is Mamu. So Wart Mamu. Let us never speak of this again. Ethan asks, what is your favorite video of yours? This might be a somewhat surprising choice, but I really like this video I made about fads of my childhood. I just think it is very well written and well edited and very personal. So I'm quite proud of it, even if it's not that popular. Canadian Gaming asks, it seems like a bunch of the little sound bites you use are early 8-bit game inspired, but I don't think you've ever addressed it before. Would you like to? Sure, just because it is fun when people acknowledge things that have previously gone unmentioned. I like using weird video game sound effects when things pop up in my videos, like this. I think I do it mostly just because I'm too sheltered to know any other way to find good sound effects. And lastly, Derek asks, what interests do you have other than politics, history, flags, money collecting, other things of that sort? So that about does it for today's Q&A video. I'm really sorry I didn't get a chance to answer more. You guys literally submitted hundreds and hundreds of really good quality questions, but I also didn't want to make this video too long and boring. But don't worry, there will be time for more questions in the future, like say when I get 100,000 subs. But anyway, huge thank you goes out to all of my 50,000 subscribers, wherever you might happen to be in this big world of ours. So long as you guys continue to keep watching my videos, I will continue to keep making them.